I found this story buried in a place most people pretend doesn't exist. Deep within the encrypted, heavily censored corners of the dark web. A place where human life is traded like currency, and the monsters we fear in the dark are actually the people we pass on the street every single day. Welcome back to Jekyll's Journal. Tonight, we are going to open a very dark chapter. I need to issue a warning before we begin. The events I am about to describe are real. They are extremely graphic, and they represent the absolute darkest depths of human psychology. If you are sensitive to descriptions of psychological horror or the morbid realities of the internet, this might be the time to close the journal and walk away. For those of you still here, turn off the lights, lock your doors, and listen closely. Because this is the true story of the Vietnamese Butcher and the terrifying reality of the world's first verified, monetized snuff film. Our story begins in July of 2025 on a website known as WatchPeopleDie. It's exactly what it sounds like. A shock site where the morbidly curious gather to watch cartel executions, industrial accidents, and the chaotic ends of human lives. The users there are completely desensitized. It takes a lot to make them uncomfortable. But when a collection of 3 videos was uploaded to the site that summer, the entire community froze. The collection was presented almost like a sick cinematic trilogy. There was no chaotic, shaky cam, no grainy CCTV footage. These videos were professionally lit. They were shot from multiple angles, using cameras mounted on tripods. They were directed, edited, and packaged for an audience. The first video was titled The Rehearsal. It opens on a low-angle shot inside what looks like a drab, everyday office. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Cheap plastic plants sit on top of misaligned filing cabinets. In the center of the room is a wooden chopping block. 2 men are in the frame. On the left is a man in his mid-30s, wearing an ill-fitting blue dress shirt. He looks uncomfortable, constantly swallowing and rubbing his neck, staring into the camera lens with an unreadable, contemplative expression. On the right stands a man wearing a dark Adidas tracksuit with neon yellow stripes. His face is completely hidden behind a plastic Guy Fawkes mask. The masked man walks behind the man in the blue shirt and ties his ankles with rope. The man in the blue shirt doesn't resist. He simply closes his eyes and waits. The masked man then roughly unbuttons the victim's shirt, pulling it off, before gently guiding his head down onto the wooden block. The masked man steps off camera and returns holding a massive meat cleaver. He raises the blade high above the kneeling man's neck and swings it down with terrifying force. But he stops, just half an inch above the skin. He lifts it and swings again and again, pantomiming a brutal execution, sawing the air just above the man's throat. The man on the block never flinches. Eventually, the kneeling man sits up, rests his head against the masked man's stomach, and the killer strokes his hair in a sickening display of comfort. Then, the video cuts to black. The users on the shock site were baffled. Was this a sick joke? A bizarre role play? Then they clicked on part 2, titled The Execution. This video was not a rehearsal. It was filmed from a top-down angle, looking over a grimy, tiled bathroom floor covered in a plastic tarp. The man from the office the one in the blue shirt, is lying naked on the tarp, his head resting on the same wooden chopping block. Outside the window, you can hear the sounds of normal, everyday life. Dogs barking, motorcycles revving, the echo of traffic. This wasn't taking place in some isolated cabin in the woods. This was happening in the middle of a busy city. The man on the floor is actively self-pleasuring, seemingly in the throes of absolute ecstasy. As he reaches his breaking point, the killer steps into the frame. He is no longer wearing the Guy Fawkes mask. Instead, he wears a blue medical mask. He raises the same meat cleaver, and this time, he does not stop. With multiple forceful strikes, he decapitates the man on the tarp. The killer doesn't panic. He doesn't scream. Through heavy, calm breaths, he simply grabs the severed head, pulls it out of the way, and methodically begins to slice open the victim's torso, splitting him from the neck down to the pubic bone. The third video, titled The Butchering, shows the killer in a kitchen systematically disassembling the human body. Organs are washed in the sink, limbs are separated and placed in pots. Photographs attached to the video leak showed the victim's heart and kidneys cooked into an herbal stew with red dates and goji berries. Another photo showed the killer standing in front of a bathroom mirror, taking a selfie while holding the victim's freshly severed head by the hair. Vice magazine would later call it the world's first verified snuff film. This wasn't a murder of passion, or revenge, or ideology. It was a murder produced specifically to be sold for profit. But who was the man on the tarp? And more importantly, who was the butcher? When the authorities in Vietnam remained entirely silent about the footage, the internet took matters into its own hands. An anonymous collective of thousands of online sleuths operating under the banner of OSINT and Cyber Investigation Vietnam began to dig. Operating from burner accounts for their own safety, they descended into the darkest forums on the web. They started by looking for the victim. His face had been clearly visible in the footage, yet no family had come forward. No missing persons reports matched his description. But the investigators knew that a crime this specific, a consensual decapitation, had to have a digital paper trail. They scoured extreme fetish forums, platforms hidden behind VPNs, and obscure corners of the web where the most depraved fantasies are shared. It didn't take them long to find a name: Nguyen Xuan Dat. Dat was 36 years old, born on March 10th, 1989. In the real world, he was a ghost. He lived a secluded life, waking up before dawn to work as a fishmonger in a busy Hanoi market. His father had passed away years ago, and his mother suffered from severe mental illness, barely remembering who he was. He had no friends, no real connections. He was a man drowning in a sea of isolation. In leaked messages, Dak once wrote, "Not only am I ugly, but I am also full of diseases. I can't afford to live freely like normal folks. I've depended on my parents my whole life. I truly am a prisoner of my very own fate." But online, Dak lived a very different life. Operating under the handle Dat Beheading, he had spent the last 6 years obsessively hunting for someone to end his life. He didn't just want to die, he wanted to be executed at the exact moment of physical climax, and he wanted his body to be consumed afterward. He even commissioned the translation of a grotesque Japanese horror manga called Applicant for Death, a story about a man who is decapitated by a woman during intimacy, using it as a twisted instruction manual for his own demise. For years, Dark begged strangers online to kill him, and finally, he found someone willing to oblige. A user who went by the name Chung. The investigators pieced together a timeline. On January 25, 2025, at 2:40 p.m., Dat sent a message to an online contact. It read, 3 hours left until the execution. It was the eve of the Lunar New Year. As families across Hanoi gathered to celebrate, setting off fireworks and preparing feasts, Nguyen Xuan Dat walked into a room with a meat cleaver he had brought himself and ceased to exist. But here is where the story turns from a tragic assisted suicide into a terrifying psychological thriller. Months after Duck was butchered and his remains were thrown into public trash bins, his Facebook account suddenly came online. On June 10, 2025, a status update was posted to Duck's page. From today, I'm logging off this account for good. The investigators felt a chill run down their spines. The killer hadn't just murdered Dat. He had stolen his phone. He was wearing his digital skin, lurking in his accounts, reading his messages, and actively using Dat's identity to fish for more victims in extreme fetish groups. He even sent a private message to one of Dat's contacts, simply stating, Dat has been beheaded. The OSINT group knew they had to unmask the butcher before he struck again. But how do you catch a ghost wearing a medical mask? You look at the details. The internet sleuths began to dissect the videos, frame by frame. They analyzed the killer's body in the mirror selfie. He was a stocky, middle-aged man with a receding hairline. He had monolid eyes and a distinct scar over his left eyebrow. He had a dark, circular birthmark on his right bicep that extended into his armpit, and another on his left shin. But the most glaring clue was a tattoo on his upper right arm. It read in Vietnamese, "That day, 13-9. Next, they analyzed the environment. The butchering video was filmed in a very specific kitchen. It had avocado green wooden doors, red baseboards, blue and white patterned floor tiles, and a white countertop. On the counter sat a bottle of La Vie water, a Vietnamese brand. But near the sink sat a cheap yellow bottle of dishwashing liquid covered in Chinese characters. Locals immediately recognized the soap. It was a cheap import that was almost exclusively sold in the northern border provinces of Vietnam, places like Lang Son, right near the Chinese border. The net was closing in. But they still needed a name. In November 2025, they got one. An anonymous whistleblower stepped forward in one of the OSINT Facebook groups. This whistleblower revealed that they had been speaking with Dat right before his death, and that Dat had given the killer their contact information. The whistleblower had been messaging the killer, who was operating under the Facebook name Cam Tan Chung. The killer was arrogant. He bragged to the whistleblower, stating, "Dat's bones have already become fertilizer." He even invited the whistleblower to meet in person to discuss their own potential execution, dropping a pin for a meeting spot in Lang Son province, right outside a government tax department. Armed with a name and a location, a YouTuber known as The Curious One took the lead. He cross-referenced public records, social media profiles, and local registries. He found a young man in his 20s named Tan Chung, whose birthday just so happened to be September 13th, 13-9. Tan Chung owned the exact same Adidas tracksuit worn by the masked man in the rehearsal video. But the young man didn't fit the physical profile. He had a full head of hair and a slender build. The killer was an older, balding man. So, the internet looked at the boy's father. His name was Doan Van Sang. He was 59 years old, a married father of 2, a respected bureaucrat, who had just retired as the deputy head of Market Management Department, Team Number 4 in Lang Son. He was a pillar of society, a man who gave lectures on the law, the head of a massive family clan with thousands of members. Investigators pulled up Sang's old Facebook photos. The resemblance was undeniable. He had the same receding hairline, the same scar over his left eyebrow. In a photo where his sleeve was rolled up, the exact same dark birthmark was visible near his armpit. On his shin, the same circular blemish. He even shared clothes with his son, explaining the Adidas tracksuit. But the most terrifying piece of the puzzle wasn't the man. It was the location. The OSINT sleuths dug up old news articles featuring Sang at his government job. In one photograph, Sang is seen inspecting goods inside the Market Management Department building. Behind him, clear as day, were avocado green wooden doors, red baseboards, blue and white floor tiles. The realization washed over the internet like a bucket of ice water. Doan Van Sang hadn't killed Nguyen Xuan Dat in a random basement. He had lured him to a government building. He knew that during the Lunar New Year, the massive market management office would be completely abandoned for 7 to 10 days. He brought a man into a state-owned facility, beheaded him in the employee bathroom, chopped his body into pieces in the department kitchen, and cooked his organs on a government stove. And when the holidays were over, Sang went back to work, smiling, shaking hands, sitting in the very same office where he had just slaughtered a human being. On November 23, 2025, the OSINT community compiled all of their evidence into a massive 106-page dossier and released it to the public. It went undeniably viral. The internet had cornered a monster. Sang began to panic. He logged onto Facebook and left unhinged, taunting comments on the investigators' posts. "I am the executioner. Who can catch me? I've lived 60 years in this world. I'm no longer afraid of death. Anyone who wants to meet me is invited to my house." 5 days after the dossier dropped, the Vietnamese police finally moved in. They sealed off the abandoned Market Management Team Number 4 building with barbed wire. Inside the kitchen drains and the septic tank, forensics teams found multiple human bone fragments and 3 human teeth. In Sang's home, they found the victim's cell phone, which Sang had casually gifted to his own sister. Doan Van Sang was arrested, and he confessed to the murder. But like a true psychopath, he tried to play the victim. He claimed that Dak had manipulated him, hypnotized him, and forced him to commit the act against his will. He conveniently ignored his own 20-year digital footprint of lurking on extreme fetish forums, begging strangers to sell him amputated body parts and plotting to consume human flesh. But the most chilling part of this story isn't just what Sang did. It's what happened after he was caught. The Vietnamese government, desperate to protect its image from the embarrassment of a high-ranking official committing a snuff murder in a state building, went into overdrive. State-run newspapers began threatening citizens. Police issued urgent notices claiming that the 106-page OSINT dossier was laced with dangerous malware that would drain bank accounts, threatening massive fines for anyone caught sharing it. They scrubbed forums, deleted posts, and tried to bury the incredible investigative work of the citizens who had actually solved the case. But you can't scrub the internet completely. The truth had already bled out. And the truth is this: Doan Van Sang was not a lone wolf acting out a sick fantasy in a vacuum. Remember the Telegram group where the videos were initially sold? The one offering the Vietnamese Butcher collection for up to $600? When journalists infiltrated that Chinese language channel, they found a massive, highly organized operation. The administrators bragged that their premium group had been stable and running for 5 years. They had tens of thousands of members. If even 1,000 people paid $600 for the Vietnamese Butcher collection, that is over $500,000 generated from a single murder. This isn't a fetish. It is an industry. A sprawling, highly lucrative black market built on human slaughter. Doan Van Sang may be sitting in a prison cell waiting for a firing squad, but the network that bought, packaged, and sold his gruesome home movies is still out there. The Telegram channels are still active. The anonymous cryptocurrency is still changing hands. Somewhere in the world right now, there is another broken, desperate soul looking for an exit. And somewhere, sitting behind a computer screen in a nice house with a loving family, is a respectable, everyday citizen sharpening a blade, getting ready to hit record. This concludes the latest journal entry. Keep your eyes open and be careful who you trust, because sometimes the monster isn't hiding under your bed. He's sitting at the desk right next to you. Until next time, stay safe.